tag team. I'm on top of the ropes and I'm gonna jump off and hit him in midair and pass the baton.
I was thinking it's like a class at the opera where you go somewhere to like cheer or boo really loudly. During the service. You're loud.
Oh.
So do you have the body mic, or are you going to be using
Now I'll use the
for
desktop.
powerful and things like that? You've got a good voice. You don't need it.
Yeah,
All right.
I have a loud voice.
You have a good voice.
Well, thank you, but it's loud.
That's not a but.
And typically what we do with that is, because I don't need her in the middle.
Now, one second. Totally, I totally should. Absolutely.
I was wondering.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Keep them unfollowed. I think that makes plenty of sense.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we're currently live, but I just want to say it was really nice to be with you all. Thanks for being here.
Steve. Steve.
Anytime.
Shana Tova. And welcome to Rosh Hashanah services. For those who are with us in person, it is so nice to see you. And for anyone who is with us virtually, we are thrilled to have you here too. Just a couple of quick announcements. I've been instructed to share with everyone that our masks will stay on throughout the services, covering both our mouths and our noses. Up here on the bima, being far away, we will be taking them off as long as we're on the bima. Outside of that, I was also told to instruct that we are not going to be holding people in the hallway today. So if you need to come out or to go in, feel free to do that. And if you're coming in at a time when the ark is open or there's a sermon going on, feel free to sort of find a free area in the back of the sanctuary. And in the meantime, I can't wait to start these holidays. So we are going to start on page 69. It's really nice to be together again, and it's hard to believe that a whole year has passed. So Yehuda Amichai once wrote, I seek a place that is pleasant and high and effective, to look out on my life for better or for worse. The truth is that we all seek a place that we can stop and think. And I pray that today provides you with that place, one that is pleasant and high and effective, to look out on your life for better or for worse, and to dream and to yearn and to figure out what you want to cherish and what you want to let go of. And that when we emerge from this experience of the High Holy Days, that we will all somehow be changed. Beginning in prayer, page 69.
HaMelech Yoshev al Kisei Ram V'Nisa Shochen Ad Maharon V'Kadosh Shemo V'Katuv Ranenu Sadikim Ba'Adonai La Yisharim Navatehila B'Fi Yisharim Titraman U'Devrei Tzadikim Titbarach U'Vilshon Chasidim Titkadash U'Vekerev Kedoshim Titchalal.
In the speech of the upright you are exalted, in the words of the righteous you are blessed, in the language of the devoted you are sanctified, and in the midst of the holy congregation you are praised.
Uv'machalot revevot amcha beit Yisrael. I don't know. Lehodot lehalel l'shabeach lefa'el l'romem lehader levarech li'alel u'kales al kol divrei shirot batishbachot David ben Yishai avdecha meshichecha yishtabach shemcha Lord Malkeinu. Berachot v'hodahot mi'ata v'ad olam Baruch atah Adonai El melech gadol batishbachot El ahodot Adon haniflaot Abocher b'shirei zimra Melech elchei ha'olamim.
Amen. The middle of page 70, the Chatzi Kaddish.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba.
Amen.
V'yalma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayechona v'yomechona v'chayedachol beit Yisrael. Bagala uvizman kariv yimeruhu. Amen. Yehesh me'ram abevarach li'alel u'amel maya. Yitbarak v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitroman v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitala shemei Kedusha b'richu b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiram b'alma v'yimeru. Amen.
Turning to page 71, we rise for the Baruchu.
Baruchu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam va'ed.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam yotzer or uvarei choshech oseh shalom uvarei et hakol Or olam beotzar chayim, orot meofel amar vayehi. We are seated and we turn to page 75.
Titbarach Sureinu Malkeinu V'go Aleinu Borei Kedoshim. V'chulam potchim et pihem b'kedusha uv'tahara b'shira uv'zimra u'mavarchim u'shabechim u'farim u'maritzim u'makdishim u'mamlichim et shem melech hagadol hagibor v'hanora kadosh hu v'chulam potchim et pihem All malchut shemayim zeh mizeh v'notnim rashut zeh lezeh l'chadish liyotzram b'nachad ruach b'safa v'ruah v'nima kedusha k'ulam ke'echad onim v'omerim b'yirah Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot Milo kol haaretz kivodo. Ha'ofanim v'chayot ha'kodesh birash gadol mitnasim liumat serafim liumatam meshabechim v'omrim Baruch kivod Adonai mimkomo.
Continuing in the middle of page 75 together. La'el Baruch ne'imochitenu, Lamelech el chai v'kayam, Zmirot yoremeru, v'tishbachot yashmi'u. Ki hu levado poel gevurot, oseh chadashot ba'al milchamot, zoreat tzedakot matzmiach yeshuot, borei refuot nora tihilot adon haniflaot. Hamechadesh betuvo b'chol yom tamid, ma'aseh v'reshit ka'amor. Le'oseh orim gedolim, ki le'olam chasto.
Or chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, v'nizkech ulanu mehira li'oro, Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer HaMeorot.
We continue on page 76, Ahava Rabbah. Ahava Rabbah.
Ahava Rabbah.
Ahava Rabbah.
Ahava Rabbah.
Ahava Rabbah.
Ahava Rabbah.
Ahavtanu.
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 Adonai Eloheinu.
Adonai Eloheinu.
You have loved us deeply, Adonai our God, and you have shown us boundless compassion. We continue in Hebrew, page 76, thinking about God's love and God's blessings for us.
V'kerutanu l'shimcha hagadol sela b'emet l'hodod l'chalachedcha b'ahava Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'amo Yisrael b'ahava.
Amen. We pause for just a moment and turn to 76 on the left-hand side of the page. God's love, we join together. You were God, and we were Israel, God alone and lonely people long ago. You loved us with God's love, and you taught us how to respond to you through mitzvot, recollections, celebrations, and Torah. They are the light of our eyes, the uniqueness of our being. In the joy of them, you have drawn us close to you. In the truth of them, we have discovered you, the only one. We are together still. You respond to every people in your chosen way. With your love, you have chosen to respond to us. With our love, we offer you our praise. We rise, turning to page 77 for the Shema.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha, v'hayu hadvarim ha'ela, asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha, v'shinantam levanecha, v'dibarta bam, v'shivtecha b'veitecha, u'v'lechtecha b'derech, u'v'shoftecha u'v'kumecha, u'kshartam le'ot ayadecha, v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha, u'ktavtam al mezuzot beitecha, u'v'sha'arecha. We're seated and continue quietly on page 77 in the middle of
Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor. Adonai Elohechem emet.
Continuing on page 79, on the left-hand side of the page, with Martin Buber. You cannot find redemption until you see the flaws in your own soul and try to efface them. Nor can a people be redeemed until it sees the flaws in its soul and tries to efface them. But whether it be an individual or a people, whoever shuts out the realization of their flaws is shutting out redemption. We can be redeemed only to the extent to which we confront and come to understand our own selves. The world is in need of redemption, but the redemption must not be expected to happen as an act of sheer grace. Our task is to make the world worthy of redemption. Our faith and our works are preparation for ultimate redemption. We continue in quiet prayer on page 79. Continuing on page 80.
Tehilot li'el elyon baruch hu mevorach Moshe u'Miriam u'vnei Yisrael lecha anu shira v'simcha rabba v'yamru chulam mi kamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nehedar ba'kodesh Nora tehilot osefele shira chadash ashivchu gilim l'shimcha al sfatayam yachad kulam hodu v'himlichu v'amru Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. Zor Yisrael, kuma bi'ezrat Yisrael, uvdeichinu mecha Yehuda v'Yisrael. Go aleinu Adonai tzvaot shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai, Goal Yisrael.
In just a moment, we will turn to page 81. We will open the ark and begin the Amidah, page 81.
Ata Adonai Eloheinu Velohei Avoteinu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak Velohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Velohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor V'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei Hakol V'Zocher Chastei Avot Umevi Goel Livnei V'Neihem Leman Shemo B'Ahava Misoda Chachamim Unevonim Umilemed Da'at Mivinim Eftacha Fi B'Tfila Uftachanunim Lechalod Ulechanein Pnei Melech Malchei Hamlachim Va'adonei Ha'adonim Zachrenu Lechayim Melech Hafetz B'Chayim V'Kadvenu B'Sefer HaChayim Zachrenu Lechayim Melech Hafetz B'Chayim Lemancha Elohim Chayim Melech Ozer Fokedu Mashiach Umagen Baruch Atah Adonai
Baruch Baruch
Magen
Shemo.
Abraham Ufoked Sarah
Amen.
Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Michaye Meitim Atah Rav Lehoshia Mechalkel Chayim Bechesed Mechaye Meitim Berachamim Rabim Somech Noflim Virofei Cholim Umatir Asurim Umkayem Emunato Lishenei Afar Mikamocha Bal Gevurot Umido Melach Melech Meimitum Chayei Umatzmiach Yeshua Mikamocha Av harachamim zocher yitzurav lechayim berachamim v'ne'eman atah lechayot meitim Baruch Atah Adonai
Baruch Shemo.
Mechayei HaMeitim
Amen.
Yimloch Adonai Le'olam Elohai Sion L'dor v'ador Hallelujah V'ata Kadosh Yoshev Tehilot Yisrael Elna.
We turn to page 84, and we come to a very special holiday prayer, Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach, Adonai Yimloch. And so this really teaches us in many ways that God has reigned, God does reign, God will reign forever, that we are all a part of a story much greater than ourselves. Page 84.
Chemna lecha Adonai melech, Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch li'olam va'ed. Kol shenani shachat biomer madirim,
Adonai melech.
Kol shochnei sheket beracha mivarchim.
Adonai malach.
Elu v'elu b'gova madilim.
Adonai himloch. Adonai melech. Adonai malach. Adonai himloch le'olam va'ed.
Kol machalei ma'ala b'deya magilim.
Adonai melech.
Kol moshlei ma'ata b'chalel mechalilim.
Adonai malach.
Elu v'elu b'vadai modim.
Adonai himloch. Adonai melech. Adonai malach. Adonai himloch le'olam va'ed.
Kol aritzei Elonim b'zemer mazimrim.
Adonai melech.
Kol ovrei olamim b'chayel mechasnim.
Adonai malach.
Elu v'elu b'ta'am mitaksim.
Adonai himloch. Adonai melech. Adonai malach. Adonai himloch le'olam va'ed. We remain standing. We turn to page 85. We will open the ark, and our next prayer is Le'el Orachdin, which speaks about God as our judge. I just want to acknowledge and offer, though, that God is also a compassionate judge on these days. So page 85, we rise.
V'chein lecha hakol yachtiru li'el orachdin levochen levavot biyomdim legolei amukot badin ledover misharin biyomdim lehogei deot badin levatik v'yosei chesed biyomdim lezocher brito badin lechomer masav biyomdim letaher chosav badim liyodea mechashavot biyomdim lechovesh kaso badim lelovesh tzedakot biyomdim lemochel avonot badim lenorah tehilot biyomdim lesoleach liam Musoff badim leoneh lekorav biyomdim lefoel rachamav badim lesofen nistarot
Lishot biyomdim Likonei avadav vadim Lirachem amo biyomdim Lishomer ohavav vadim Letomek temimav biyomdim Letomek temimav badin.
The ark now closes, but we remain standing with our feet together for the Kedusha, which can be found on page 86. On the bold lines, we'll lift ourselves up onto the balls of our feet like angels aspiring to live even better lives. Page 86, the Kedusha.
Yekadesh shemcha ba'olam kishem shimakdishim oto b'shmei maron kakatuv yad neviecha v'kara zel zeh v'amar Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melech kol haaretz kivodo. As bekol v'rash gadol, adir v'chazak, mashmihim kol, mitnasim liyumat serafim, liyumatam baruch yomeru.
Baruch kivod Adonai mimkomo.
Mimkomecha Malkeinu Tofia v'timloch aleinu kimecha kimanachnu lach matai timloch v'tzion v'karov b'yameinu li'olam va'et tishkon titkadal v'titkadash v'toch Yerushalayim ircha L'dor vador, l'netzach nitzachim, v'einenu tirena malchutecha, kadavar ha'amor b'shirei uzecha, al yedei David Mashiach sitkecha.
Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Elohai Yitzion, L'dor vador, hallelujah.
L'dor vador nardgid God lecha, ulenetzach nitzachim kedushatcha nakdish, v'shivchacha Eloheinu mipila u'mushli olam va'ed, ki el melech gadol v'kadosh ata.
We continue in quiet personal prayer through page 91. At the end of your Kedusha, at the end of your Amidah, make sure to take time for your personal prayers to God.
Sefer Chaim bracha v'shalom ufarnasa tova nizachev v'nikatev lefanecha anachnu v'chol amcha Beit Yisrael, L'chaim tovim, Ushalom. Baruch atah Adonai, Oseh HaShalom.
We turn to the left side of the page and we read together in the middle of the page. Grant peace to the world, goodness and blessing, grace, love, and compassion to us and to all the people Israel. Bless us, our Creator, united as one in the light of your countenance. By that light, Adonai our God, you gave us a guide to life, the love of kindness, righteousness, blessing, compassion, life, and peace. May it please you to bless your people Israel at every season and at all times with your gift of peace. May we and the entire house of Israel be called to mind and inscribed for life, blessing, sustenance, and peace in the book of life. We turn now to page 92 for one of my favorite prayers, Avinu Malkeinu. It used to be that there were only 2 lines in this entire prayer. It was a short and a simple wish that came with a very interesting story that was found in the Talmud. It was a story about a time when there was a terrible drought happening and the people were beside themselves and they needed rain. And so they asked the rabbis if they would pray for rain to fall. And one of the greatest leaders of the community stood up and he prayed and he prayed and he prayed for rain, but the rains didn't fall. And then one of his students, Rabbi Akiva, stood up and he said 2 lines. He said, Avinu Malkeinu, we have no king but you. Avinu Malkeinu, for your sake have mercy on us. Just those 2 simple lines and the rains came pouring down. Since then, we've added another 42 or so lines to our prayers.
We've gotten greedy.
We ask for a lot nowadays, but it's also true that these prayers fit into 4 different categories. Basically, what we're asking God for is to protect us, to keep us safe from enemies and illness, from plagues, to help us repent because repenting is hard, to give us all sorts of blessings. And the very last line at the very end says, even though we are not worthy of any of this, right? Even though we might not deserve it, please God, give us all of these blessings with generosity and abundance. So we start our prayers, page 92, asking God.
Avinu Malkeinu chatanu lefanecha. Avinu Malkeinu ein lanu melech ela ata.
We have no sovereign but you.
Avinu Malkeinu aseh imanu lema'an shemecha.
Avinu Malkeinu, act toward us kindly in accord with your name.
Avinu Malkeinu chadesh aleinu shana tova.
Avinu Malkeinu, make this a good new year for us.
Avinu Malkeinu betel me'aleinu kol gezerot kasho.
Avinu Malkeinu, annul every harsh decree against us.
Avinu Malkeinu betel machashvot shoneinu.
Avinu Malkeinu, nullify the designs of our enemies.
Avinu Malkeinu kol yotzer.
Rid us of every oppressor and adversary. Avinu Malkeinu, rid your covenant people of disease, war, hunger, captivity, and destruction. Avinu Malkeinu, forgive and pardon all of our sins. Avinu Malkeinu, do not look toward our sins and transgressions, blot them out. Malkeinu, return us in your presence, fully penitent. Avinu Malkeinu, send complete healing to the sick. Avinu Malkeinu, send complete. We join together in the middle of the left-hand side. Avinu Malkeinu, return us to your presence, fully penitent. Avinu Malkeinu, send complete healing to the sick among your people. Avinu Malkeinu, remember us favorably. Avinu Malkeinu, inscribe us for good in the book of life. Avinu Malkeinu, inscribe us in the book of redemption. Avinu Malkeinu, inscribe us in the book of sustenance. Avinu Malkeinu, inscribe us in the book of merit. Avinu Malkeinu, inscribe us in the book of forgiveness. We continue in quiet prayer, Avinu Malkeinu, page 92 and 93. Avinu Malkeinu.
Avinu Malkeinu, kadvenu b'sefer chayim tovim. Avinu Malkeinu, kadvenu b'sefer Geula v'Yeshua. Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, kadvenu b'sefer Panasa v'chalchala. Avinu Malkeinu, kadvenu b'sefer Zechuyot. Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, kadvenu b'sefer Selicha umechila.
We can.
Avinu Malkeinu,
Chanenu v'aneinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu v'aneinu. Ki ein banu ma'asim. Aseh imanu, tzedakah v'chesed. Aseh imanu, tzedakah v'chesed v'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu v'aneinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu v'aneinu. Ki ein banu ma'asim. The ark is closed and we are seated, turning to page 94, Kaddish Shalem.
Yitadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah.
Amen.
Yivrach v'yirtei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechonu v'yamechonu v'chay d'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala v'zman kariv v'yimeru.
Amen.
Yehi
Yehi shmei Rabba Mevorach, le'olam le'olam le'omaya yitbarach.
Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'par v'yichamam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei d'Kedusha. Le'ela le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechamata da'amiram b'yalma v'yimeru.
Amen.
Kabel Saloton Avotahon, the Chol Yisrael, Kadama Vohondi V'Shemaya V'Yimeru.
Amen.
Shlam Rabba Min Shemaya V'Chayim Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael V'Yimeru.
Amen.
Oseh Shalom B'Romav, Hu Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael V'Al Kol Yoshvei Tevel V'Yimeru.
Amen. Yasher Koach.
Yeah.
Big thanks to Steve Silverman for leading us in Shacharit this morning. In just a moment, we are going to turn to our Torah service. And before we do, I wanted to share with you an excerpt by Pete Davis. Pete Davis, for those who are unfamiliar, lives in Falls Church, and he is working on projects to deepen democracy. He spoke at a Harvard Law School graduation, and I hope his words resonate with you. He wrote, "I have discovered this year that the people who inspire me the most are those who left the hallway, shut the door behind them, and settled in. It's Fred Rogers recording episode 895 of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood because he was committed to advancing a humane model of children's television. It's Dorothy Day sitting with the same outcast folks night after night after night because it was important that someone is committed to them. It's not just the Martin Luther King who confronted the fire hoses in 1963, but it's the Martin Luther King who hosted his 1,000th boring planning meeting in 1967. When Hollywood tells tales of courage, they usually take the form of slaying the dragon. It's all about the big, brave moments. But I've been learning from these heroes that the most menacing dragons that stand in the way of reforming the system or repairing the breach are the everyday boredom and distraction and uncertainty that can erode our ability to commit to anything for the long haul. I love that the word dedicate has two meanings. First, it means to make something holy, and second, it means to stick at something for a long time. I don't think this is a coincidence. We do something holy when we choose to commit to something. And in the most dedicated people that I have met, I have witnessed how that pursuit of holiness comes with a side effect of immense joy. We may yearn to keep our options open, but I believe that the most radical act we can take is to make a commitment to a particular thing, to a place, a profession, a cause, a community, or to a person, to show our love for something by working at it for a long time, to close doors and forgo options for its sakes. My question for you on this Rosh Hashanah is, what might you want to commit or recommit yourself to in this new year? It doesn't have to be something that will necessarily change the world, but something that might change someone else's life and could change yours. What's something that you want to commit to? In just a moment, we will take out the Torah, turning to page 96, and the Ark will open soon.
Ein kamocha va'elohim Adonai, ein kemasecha, malechutecha malechut kol olamim, umemshaltecha bechol dor vador. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai melech, le'olam va'ed. Adonai oz le'amo yiten, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. Avarachamim heitiv avirtzoncha et Zion. Tivenei chamot Yerushalayim, Tivenei Yerushalayim. Ki lecha levad batachnu, melech el ram v'nisa, Adon olamim. Vayehi bin Saharon, vayomer Moshe, Kum Adonai, v'yafutzu oivecha, v'yanusu mesanecha, mipanecha, ki mitzion teitei Torah, ki mitzion teitei Torah, u'devar Adonai miYerushalayim. Baruch Shenatan Torah, Torah. Baruch Shenatan Torah, Torah. Le'amo Yisrael b'kedushato.
Continuing on page 97.
Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, Derech Apayim v'Rav Chesed v'Emet, Noter Chesed la'alafim, Nosei Avon Afesham, V'chata v'nakem.
We join in private meditation on the left-hand side, the middle of page 97. Avinu Malkeinu, Master of Peace. Avinu Malkeinu, Master of Peace. Help us and strengthen us so that we always strive for peace. May there be harmony among all people, their companions and friends. May there be no discord among the members of my family. You who established peace above, extend peace upon us and the whole world. May we draw close to you and your Torah and truth. And may we all be bound together, carrying out your will wholeheartedly. Master of Peace, bless us with peace.
Vani tefilati lecha Adonai et ratzon Elohim berav chasdecha Aneni Aneni b'emet yishecha.
May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. We turn now to page 98.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kaddish v'nara Shema.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh v'nora Shemo.
Gadolun Adonai iti, uneromma Shema yachtav. Lecha Adonai hagedollah, v'hagevora, v'hatiferet, v'hanetzach v'hod. Ki chol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz, Ki chol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz, Lecha Adonai hamamlecha, v'amid na'asei, Lecha leRosh, Romemu, Romemu, Adonai Eloheinu, Ve'yishtachavu, Ve'yishtachavu, L'adom raglav kadoshu, Romemu, Romemu, Adonai Eloheinu, Ve'yishtachavu, Ve'yishtachavu, Lord God, Ki Kadosh, Adonai Eloheinu.
That may have been the scariest part of my day. Everyone may be seated. And today, as you can tell, as I tiptoed over to try to help with the Torah, we are going to limit the amount of people on our bima for safety's sake. And so what we're going to actually do is we are going to divide up our Torah portions a little bit differently. And what we're going to invite you to do both in this sanctuary and in the other is for everybody to rise for the first aliyah. So we'll all share the first aliyah. And then at the end of all of the Torah reading, we'll all say the final bracha. We'll all say the final blessing. So I'd like to now invite everybody to please rise as we join together in reciting the aliyah for the Torah.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Barach Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamborach
Leolam
leolam va'ed. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch ata Adonai
Notein HaTorah. Amen. Everyone can be seated, and we have a Torah chat for you around this Torah portion. Please listen in.
Rabbi Sorokin, hello, good morning. How are you? Hope you're doing well.
Hey, Rabbi Schwartz. Good to see you.
Yeah, seeing you once again, at least in this context, introducing Torah readings to folks via these Zoom chats. We thought we wouldn't be doing this year, but we are, and so glad that we can. We want to, of course, welcome all those who are able to join us in the Berman Reuben and the Offit this year for services, and those who are joining us at home and enjoying services from home base. So just like to think with folks for a few minutes this morning about the Torah reading for the first day of Rosh Hashanah. This morning's reading comes from the 21st chapter of the book of Genesis, and we find ourselves deep into the cycle of stories about Abraham and Sarah. And always strikes me that here we are at the beginning of a year, and the stories that the sages choose for us to read are about beginnings. Beginning of Abraham and Sarah's family, in a sense, the beginning of this journey that they take, forming this covenantal relationship with God in their lives that they ultimately bring, of course, to the Jewish people, and you could say to the rest of the world. So Rabbi Sorokin, I know you love these stories, some of your favorites, and as you approach them this year, each year it's different, right? As you approach them this year, what thoughts do you find that these stories are bringing into your mind?
Yeah, thanks, Rabbi Schwartz. It's an interesting thing as we're, sort of sitting down to make these clips. I think in some ways, like one of the things that's definitely happening for me is I'm thinking about where we were last year and then where we are right now, and thinking of just, reading the same Torah portion, but with a different lens, because we aren't in that same place anymore. And we're no longer, the same people as we were when we read it last year. So it's been sort of interesting to just play around with a year, with sort of time. But in particular, I think one of the things that's interesting to me this year is just the very start of the first Aliyah. And if you look in, it says, Va'adonai pakad, right? So God takes note of, or God took note of Sarah. And we're going to see in the Torah reading that, what this is actually referring to is that Sarah has yearned for a child for, nine decades, right? For 90 years. And finally, God sort of responds to her desire, to her aspiration, to her yearning, and she finds out that she's going to have a baby, and she and Abraham do have a baby named Isaac, Yitzchak, or laughter, and then we see the beginning of Yitzchak's life and their life as a family of three. So I think one of the things that I'm thinking a lot about this year is just that the Adonai Pakad, right, that God takes note of. And just this idea that really over the past year, in the Torah reading, God is remembering Sarah, but in many ways, just like the power of feeling noted or remembered or witnessed or, sort of, I guess to some degree, sort of like responded to. And, I think it's been a really hard year. It has been a really hard year for so many people. And, in our isolation, there was a lot of loneliness, there was a lot of depression, and there was for many people a sense of being forgotten and being removed from or, alone. And so I guess for me, one of the things that I'm thinking of is like how we like God sort of responded by taking note of, others. And I think that there were all different kinds of ways that people did that. Invisible hands dropped off food and medicine, carrying collars, called people in their homes, neighbors tacked on windows. Like there were some really beautiful expressions of taking note of and caring. And I don't know what the year ahead will bring, but I do think that that's like one of the things that, I hope people will take out of this Torah reading, the holidays this year, is like just remembering how it feels to be forgotten or to be isolated or to be alone. And then how it feels in those moments where, whether it's God or another human being, remembers you and takes note of you. And just figuring out how we can keep doing that for each other, no matter what this year will bring.
Yeah, you're bringing into my mind the Bethel theme for the holiday season, which is better together. And for sure, that is something we have come to terms with and understood, I think, in a much deeper way since last Yontif to this Yontif, right? And also, it strikes me that in some ways, because you said this, that the reading is the same, but what you bring to the reading changes every year because you've gone through a year of life. I mean, what can happen in the course of 1 year in your life, and because of that, the Torah readings. And also, I think the rituals of the holiday, these are like measuring sticks because they stay the same, and they enable us to examine ourselves and our lives, almost like a mirror, and to see how much has changed, and to use that as a setting to really think about the year and to look forward, God willing, to a better year to come. So again, so happy to be together with everyone, whether you're online with us or here in our sanctuaries on this first day of Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of a new year. And following the Torah reading, you can find it in our Machzorim, in the Lev Shalem. It's on page 100. If you have a different Chumash at home, we're in Genesis, book of Genesis, beginning of chapter 21. We'll be back with you shortly.
Adonai pakad et Sarah kasher amar vayas Adonai l'Sarah kasher diber vatahar vatelet Sarah li'Avraham ben lizkunav lamohed asher diber oto Elohim vayikra Avraham et shem beno hanolad lo asher ילדה לו שרה יצחק, וימל אברהם את יצחק בנו בן 8 ימים, כאשר ציווה אותו אלוהים. ואברהם בן 100 שנה בהיוולד לו את יצחק בנו. ותאמר שרה צחוק עשה לי אלוהים, כל השומע יצחק לי. ותאמר מי מילל לאברהם הניק אבנים שרה כי ילדתי בן לזקוניו. ויגדל הילד ויגמל, ויעש אברהם משתה גדול ביום היגמל את יצחק. ותרא שרה את בן הגר המצרית אשר ילדה לאברהם מצחק. ותאמר לאברהם גרש האמה הזאת ואת בנה, כי לא גירש בן האמה הזאת עם בני עם יצחק. וירא הדבר מאוד בעיני אברהם על אודות בנו. ויאמר אלוהים אל אברהם, אל יירא בעיניך על הנער ועל אמתך, כל אשר תאמר אליך שרה שמע בקולה, כי ביצחק יקרא לך זרע.
Amen. We pause here before the third Aliyah. And the third Aliyah, we see that Sarah tells Abraham to cast out that woman, right? To cast out Hagar, that woman, that slave woman and her son. And one of the things that gives us space to really consider, right, is this idea of how we treat the other, right? It's easy to love people that are like us, our family, our neighbors, but it's harder to love people that feel other. So one of the other things we see in this portion that we're about to read is that in many ways Sarah is motivated by almost a fear, right? She fears that there's not enough, right? There's not enough love of her husband to go around. There's not enough space in her home to share. There's not enough. So one of the questions I want to pose to you today is, where in your life are you operating from a place of scarcity? Where could you be more generous if you believed that there was enough light, enough love, enough power, enough space that you could share a bit of what you had, or at least recognize that you are safe and to extend yourself to others who might not be. We're going to continue with the third aliyah, page 100.
וגם את בן האמה לגוי אשימנו כי זרעך הוא. וישכם אברהם בבוקר ויקח לחם וחמת מים וייתן אל הגר. שם על שכמה ואת הילד וישלחה ותלך ותיתה במדבר באר שבע ויאכלו המים מן החמת ותשלח את הילד תחת אחד השיחים ותלך ותשב לה מנגד הרחק כמתחה וקשת כי אמרה אל אראה במות הילד ותשב מנגד ותישא קולה ותבך וישמע אלוהים את קול הנהר ויקרא מלאך אלוהים אל הגר מן השמיים ויאמר לה מלאך הגר אל תראי כי שמע אלוהים אל קול הנער באשר הוא שם קומי שאי את הנער והחזיקי את ידך בו כי לגוי גדול אשימנו ויפקח אלוהים את עיניה ותרא באר מים ותלך ותמלא את החמת מים ותשק את הנער ויהי אלוהים את הנער ויגדל וישב במדבר ויהי רוב הקשת וישב במדבר פרן ותיקח לו אמו אישה מארץ מצרים ויהי בעת ההיא ויאמר אבימלך ופי כל שר צבאו אל אברהם לאמור אלוהים עמך בכל אשר אתה עושה ואתה השבה לי ואלוהים הנה אם תשקור לי ולניני ולנכדי כך אשר אשר עשיתי עמך תעשה עמדי ועם הארץ אשר גרת בה ויאמר אברהם אנוכי איש שבע והוכיח אברהם את אבימלך על אודות באר המים אשר גזלו עבדי אבימלך ויאמר אבימלך לא ידעתי מי עשה את הדבר הזה וגם אתה לא הגדת לי וגם אנוכי לא שמעתי בלתי היום ויקח אברהם צאן ובקר וייתן לאבימלך ויכרתו שניהם ברית ויצב אברהם את שבע כבשות הצאן לבדהן ויאמר אבימלך אל אברהם מה הנה שבע כבשות האלה אשר הצבת לבדנה ויאמר כי את שבע כבשות תיקח מידי בעבור תהיה לי לעדה כי חפרתי את הבאר הזאת על כן קרא למקום ההוא באר שבע כי שם נשבעו שניהם ויכרתו ברית בבאר שבע ויקם אבימלך ופיכל שר צבאו וישובו אל ארץ פלישתים וייטע אש אל בבאר שבע ויקרא שם בשם אדוני אל עולם ויגר אברהם בארץ פלישתים ימים רבים.
We rise and we recite the closing bracha together.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chaye olam nata betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. And Yishar Kochech. We are now going to be seated. And one of the things in the last part of the Torah portion that I wanted to share with you that we read, it's an interesting moment in the page 102 in the fifth aliyah, is that Avimelech and Abraham have had a rift in their relationship. Something has happened, they're distrusting of each other, and they accuse each other and respond defensively. And in the spirit of the high holiday work that we're doing, I actually think it's a nice time in our service to pause and to think about the relationships in our lives. Maybe a relationship or relationships in your life where things feel stuck, or where there might feel like there is mending or fixing or repair that needs to happen. And again, this is the time. We have from now until Yom Kippur when the gates close. So just to start doing that thinking, where are those places in your life where relationships might need to get cleaned up or tended to in order to begin anew in the year to come from a stronger and a better and a more loving place? With that thought in mind, we will turn to page 106 and we will rise.
יתגדל ויתקרא שמי רבה.
Amen.
ועלמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב וימרו אמן. יש מרבה מברך לעולם ולעלמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודשה בריחו לעילה לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ויאמרו אמן. וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לבני בני ישראל על פי אדוני ביד משה.
Torah, 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 ציווה לנו משה. Torah, 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 ציווה לנו משה. מורשה קהילת יעקב, מורשה קהילת יעקב, מורשה קהילת יעקב, תורה ציווה לנו משה. just a moment, we will recite a Mishavera prayer for healing. And our Mishavera will call to mind anyone, including ourselves, that are in need of a physical healing or an emotional healing today and in this moment of time. It's also noteworthy that many of us in an ordinary time may have even considered benching Gomel and thanking God for delivering us through a time where we felt like our lives were at risk, or we felt threatened or feared that we might not live to see this holiday. And here we are, so there's a lot to be grateful for. The Mishavera. Misheberach Avoteinu
Mekor habracha
Leavoteinu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach Imotenu, Mikor habracha Leimotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, with renewal of body, with a renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Wishing a refuah shlema, healing, recovery, and health to those for whom we have prayed. Ralph, will you keep holding that for one more minute? This is what happens when your family's the only one allowed on the bima. So on the bottom of page 107, I said before with a weak battery that this year we really are and should be grateful. Many of us feel like we weren't sure whether we were going to live through. The year that was, or have our families survive a year. So if anyone felt that sense of fear that your life was in danger and that you have lived through it, and you feel ready to say that bracha, that prayer, please join me on page 107. We're going to go to the English side of the page. Baruch atah Adonai, our God, ruler of time and space, who bestows goodness on us despite our imperfections, and who has treated me so favorably. May the one who has shown such favor to you continue to bestow all that is good upon you. Selah. Amen. And thank God. 5782. We did it. Everyone may be seated, and we turn to page 108 for our Haftarah. But before we start to chant, Rabbi Schwartz and I had a Torah chat to share.
And Rabbi Sorokin should just spend a minute or two thinking with folks about this morning's Haftarah. It's a great text, one of the great biblical texts for sure. Brings a lot of meaning to the holiday. Always interesting to me why the sages choose texts for particular holidays. But one of the things that's striking about the reading this year to me is that sense of Hannah and what does it mean to be alone. She clearly feels very alone, despite the fact that she's surrounded by people. The beginning of the text is she's at the feast, she's with her husband, Elkanah, everyone's having a wonderful time, and she sits at the same table as everyone. I mean, people are talking, and we've all been there, right? And yet she, in her heart, feels totally alone and totally isolated. And so we know what happens. She leaves the table and has this very powerful and profound prayer experience. What's your take on the text?
It's so interesting that you say that because, just given the beginning of this Haftarah, you really sort of can gloss over the fact that she is at a feast, right? This idea, because what we also know is that she's sort of in this space in her life where she's actually being tormented, and she's being tormented because she's struggling with infertility and she wants nothing more than to have a baby. And, Penina, who's sort of her nemesis, is, mocking her. At least she feels Penina mocking her. And so, like you said, she gets up from this feast, right, from this place of total joyful celebration, and she sort of leaves the party, if you will, and she walks away. And I feel like it's that moment where, like, there's like something going on, it's super celebratory, and you're like, I'm just gonna go to the bathroom, or like, I'm just gonna like go outside for a minute, right? That like, I'm not feeling it. I'm not in sync with the joy that everyone else is holding.
The paradox of it is that you can actually sometimes feel more alone in a group of people, right? You feel more alone in a group of people than if you're by yourself, because of that sort of disconnect with how everyone else is experiencing a moment and how you're experiencing it.
It's so true. It's so true. And for sure it was with Hannah, and then she went out, and it's funny, she left this community, right, that was celebrating together, and she goes to this quiet place, and she instead sort of enters this conversation with God, which is deeply personal and powerful, and she prays her heart out. And one of the things that I love about Hannah's prayer is that I think it actually teaches us, a lot of times when we're praying, and we're doing this throughout the day today, we're sort of sticking to the script, the script of our ancestors, the script of our rabbis, this script that doesn't necessarily describe what it is that's really going on in our hearts and our souls and our minds. And Hannah leaves that script. She doesn't care that we're on page 83.
Right.
She needs to share something with God, and what she needs to share is hard, and it's painful, and it's her suffering, and she needs to share her request, right, that God should just, finally give her this child that is all she yearns for, and the promises that she's going to make surrounding a miracle if God will give her this child. And so I do love this idea, this inspiration, really, that like at some point put down your prayer book, or close it up and take that time to really pour out your own heart. There's a practice that Rabbi Nachman did, he called Hitbodedut. And the idea of it is that you go to a quiet place. He would go out into nature, and you just talk and talk and talk to God. And, a lot of times this year we've been doing that in Morning Gratitude, where we set a timer and we do 4 minutes. And I say to people, like, the only instruction is don't stop talking, right? Even if you say, I don't know what else to say to you, God, but keep on talking out loud. So Hannah prays her prayer, and then, as you know, sort of comes that moment where Eli steps in and is like, what are you doing? And then he accuses her of being drunk, and she explains. So what do you think about that sort of moment, Rabbi Schwartz, where there's sort of this misunderstanding, if you will, of what Hannah is doing there?
Yeah, I mean, partially it's a story about misperception. Elkanah doesn't realize, this is Hannah's husband, he doesn't realize how troubled she really is and how sad she is inside. Eli doesn't realize what's happening. So the series of misperceptions. It's also fascinating to me, always has been, that the Talmudic sages really turn to this story in terms of understanding what it means to pray in a sincere way. And they actually say that when you pray, you should try to pray like Hannah prays in this story, which is probably one of the reasons why the story is chosen by the sages to be read on Rosh Hashanah day 1, the beginning of the High Holy Day season.
You know what's so interesting about what you said, that idea of sort of continuous misperceptions? I've never really thought about it that way, but when you do think about it that way, it actually can really be helpful in this bigger picture of tshuva, right? Like in the spirit of the season, that in many ways, when you're watching, someone else's story unfold, it's easy to see, what's going awry, like where people are missing the story, as the primary person is experiencing it. And I think in some ways, maybe that creates a little bit of space for us to be more compassionate and maybe even more forgiving in realizing that, like, a lot of times our judgments might not be right.
100%, right? It's the old idea. You never know what it's like to stand in somebody else's shoes. We often think we do. But the truth is no. And that's another important idea for the High Holy Days, and maybe another reason why the sages chose this text to be read on this day. So those following at home, in the Machzor, you will find the text on page 108. It comes from Samuel chapter 1, Samuel 1, so book 1 of Samuel, chapter 1. Enjoy the reading.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'ratzav divreihem hane'emarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah uv'Moshe avdo uv'Yisrael amo uv'Nevi'ei ha'emet v'tzedek. Vayihi shechad min haramatayim sofim meher Ephraim u'shemol Elkanah ben Yerocham ben Elihu ben Atochu ben Musoff Ephrati v'lo shetei nashim shem achat Chana v'shem hashenim Penina vayihi lifnina yeladim ulachana ein yeladim ve'ala ha'ish hahu me'iro miyamim yamima lihishtachavot v'lizboach ladonai tzivaot b'shilo v'sham shnei v'nei Eli chofeni u'finchas kohanim ladonai vayihi hayom vayizbach Elkanah v'natan lifnina ishto ulachal baneha uv'noteha manot ulchana itein manachat apayim ki et chana hev v'Adonai segor rachma v'titpalel chana v'tomar alatz libi b'Adonai Rama karni b'Adonai rachav pi al oivai ki samachti b'shuatecha ein kadosh kadonai ki ein biltecha v'ein sur keloheinu al tarbu tidabru givoha yetze atak mi pichem ki el deot Adonai v'lo nitkanu alilot keshet gibarim chatim v'nichshalim azruchail saveim balechem niskaru or evim chadelu Arakara yelda shiva v'rabat banim u'malayla Adonai meimitu mechaye morit she'ovayal Adonai marishu ma'ashir mashpil af miromeim Meki me'afar dal, me'ashpot yarim evion, lehoshivim nedivim, v'chisei chavod yanchilem, ki l'Adonai mitzu ke'eretz, vayashem alehem tevel, ragalei chasidav yishmur, or sha'im b'choshech yidamu, ki lo v'choach yigabarish, Adonai yechatu merivav, alav bashamayim yareim, Adonai yadin afsei aretz, vayitein oz limalko, v'yarem kerem mishicho. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam,
114.
sor kol ha'olamim, sadik b'chol hadorot, ha'el ha'neman, ha'omer v'yoseh, ha'medaber mekayem, shekol devarav emet v'tzedek. Ne'eman atahu Adonai Eloheinu, v'nemanim devarecha, v'davarecha midvarecha, achor lo yashuv reikam, Ki el melech ne'eman v'rachaman atah, Baruch atah Adonai.
Baruch Shemo.
Ha'el ha'ne'eman b'chol devarav.
Amen.
Rachem al Tzion ki hi beit chayenu, v'la'aluvat nefesh toshia b'mheira v'yameinu. Baruch atah Adonai.
Baruch Shemo.
Misameach Sion b'vanecha.
Amen.
Samcheinu Adonai Eloheinu, B'Eliyahu Hanavi Avdecha, Uv'malchut Beit David Mishichecha, B'mheira Yavo V'yagel Libenu, Al Kiso Lo Yeshiv Zar, V'lo Yinkolu Od Acherim Et Kavodo, Ki V'shem Kachechal Nishbatalo, Shalok B'neirot Leolam Va'ed, Baruch Atah Adonai. Magen David. Al HaTorah, v'al HaAvodah, v'al HaNevi'im, v'al Yom HaZikaron Hazeh, Shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu, lichavod u'letifaret. Al HaKol Adonai Eloheinu, anachnu modim lach, u'mavarachim otav, yitbarach shimcho befi kochai, Tami li'olam va'ed, u'davaracha emet v'kayam la'ad, Baruch atah Adonai.
Baruch Shemo.
Melech al kol ha'aretz, mikadesh Yisrael, v'yom hazikaron.
Amen. Yasher koach. As we just finished the Haftarah, one of the things that you may have noticed, beautiful read, Sharon. One of the things that you may have noticed is that Ailey says just one kind thing to Hannah and it changes her life. So I don't know if you all have been following. There's been an interesting conversation taking place in mostly the New York Times, began by Adam Grant, and it's about flourishing and languishing. And actually, interestingly enough, he recognizes a term that was coined back in the 80s, which is languishing, the opposite of flourishing. And he says that languishing is that feeling of blah, which I feel like a lot of people sort of had during the pandemic. So the after conversation of this is that someone suggested 7 different ways that we can lift our spirit to get us out of that place of languishing and closer to that space of flourishing. And one of the things that they suggested was that we could do, studies have shown that it is good for your soul to do 5 deeds of chesed, 5 kindnesses to extend to others in one day of the week. So not to spread them out, to pick one day of the week and to do this repeatedly, right? It's not a one-time gig. It's repeatedly, once a week, to do 5 nice things, 5 acts of chesed, 5 deeds of kindness in our world or for others. And they say that that's one of the ways that we can transform the state of being of our soul. So if anyone is interested in that, if anyone's looking for something different, Ben Franklin. This might surprise you. It surprised me, but I thought it was very beautiful. Ben Franklin, a long time ago, every morning, he would write this question on a piece of paper. What good will I do in the world today? And every night, he would write, what good did I do? It's an interesting practice, always to help us to extend that kindness, to change our lives, to change others' lives, and to change the world. We are going to turn now to our Israel bond appeal. This is the last Torah chat that Rabbi Schwartz and I do. We try to play around with the idea of, has it been a good year for Israel, or has it been a tough year for Israel? Spoiler alert, we say it's probably been both. Listen in.
Rabbi Sorokin, it's important year in and year out when we come to the High Holy Days to pause for a moment, to think about the state of Israel, our relationship with the state of Israel, how important Israel is to us as individuals, as Jews, to the worldwide Jewish community. And one of the ways we do that during this season is to think about investing in an Israel bond. And you and I were talking over the last couple of weeks and figuring out what exactly should we say today. And it was kind of interesting because I said, boy, I feel like it's been kind of a tough year for Israel. And I hope that people will respond to that and will decide to invest in an Israel bond this year. And you said, well, actually, I think it's been a pretty good year for Israel. So just maybe you could lay out for us the good things, and I'll try to remind folks of why it's been a challenging year.
Absolutely. And Rabbi Schwartz, I think the funny part is that when you and I were talking, you said, it's been a tough year for Israel, which is why people should buy bonds. And I said, it's also been a great year for Israel, which is why people should buy bonds, right? All of these things hopefully will lead us to becoming supporters through bonds. So what do I think made this a good year for Israel? I feel like there were a lot of things. I mean, Israel was on the cutting edge, on the forefront in her relationship with Pfizer. I felt like she was always sort of a step ahead in terms of, immunizations, boosters, and really sort of the studies that were coming out of Israel, I think were very helpful, to us and to the rest of the world in figuring out our next steps. And, while the pandemic isn't over, I do appreciate the role that Israel played in sort of the world scene. And I definitely have an eye on Israel always for many, many reasons. Another thing I think that was a really huge deal was this open relationship that we now entered into with the UAE. And I feel like Israel's made huge progress in terms of having open relationships with her Middle Eastern neighbors, and really showing us that in these relationships, Israel is capable of thriving, and that's exciting, as well as the partners are also sort of being lifted up. I'm trying to think. I feel like technology, Israel has had another extraordinary year, as well as environmental issues and breakthroughs. Israel again has had an amazing year. Israel had 2 golds and 2 bronzes in the Olympics, which is huge.
Yep.
And made us all proud. And then, in addition to that, I would just say that the government in Israel was able to create a much broader and more inclusive government or coalition, and I think that's a really sort of worthy thing to celebrate.
Yeah, for sure. And some would say maybe the broadest, most inclusive coalition in the history of the Knesset. So Rabbi Sorokin, you're convincing me. You're convincing me.
But there are other things too. You tell us.
Well, no. So, I think that, one of the reasons people make a decision to invest in an Israel bond is because of what you just laid out, that there's so many reasons for us to be proud of Israel, what Israel accomplishes. And the truth is, Israel is one of the greatest nations in the entire world. And that pride that we feel in the Jewish homeland makes us want to purchase a bond, connect with the homeland in that way. So that's a big piece of it. On the other hand, though, I think people are worried about Israel. It's pride for Israel, and then it's concern for Israel. And on certain levels, I thought it was a very tough year for Israel. We had a stretch where there was a tremendous amount of rocket fire coming into Israel from the Gaza Strip. And world opinion felt, at least to a certain extent, that it sort of turned against Israel during that time. It's always hurtful. We feel that as a painful thing in the Jewish community. And so that's a reason to, at this time, support Israel and show our support for Israel by purchasing a bond, by investing in a bond. COVID, although Israel initially at least coped with it very, very well, probably arguably maybe better than any other country in the world, New Zealand maybe, but the truth is that COVID has terribly hurt Israel's tourist industry, which is a hugely important industry to Israel and to Israel's economy. And I think also that this has been a year where, as a worldwide Jewish community, we've experienced anti-Semitism, and Israel always bears the brunt of that in worldwide opinion. And so for all of these reasons, as Jews in America, we feel concerned for the Jewish homeland, and we show support for Israel by purchasing a bond. So I think it's both a way of showing how proud we are of Israel, what she accomplishes, not only this year, but year in and year out, and in her history, coming up soon to Israel's 75th birthday, a couple of years down the road. And then the concern that we feel for Israel, wanting to make sure that by investing in a bond, we show that we are caring, we are concerned, and we are connected. It's always very important in Baltimore to acknowledge Baltimore, one of the great Israel bond offices in the country, one of the great Israel bond programs in the country, with terrific leadership, both professional and lay leadership, and an incredible matching program in our community. With matches, when we purchase bonds, when we invest in bonds, there are in the community 4 forces that come along and match our purchases. The Associated does that, West Banco Bank does it, Sandra and Malcolm Berman do it, and also the Haron Dahan Foundation does it. So your investment in a bond this year, let's say you invest $500 in a bond, the state of Israel gets that investment at $1,000. So you should consider that as you consider making your purchase this year as well. Rabbi Sorokin, any last thoughts?
I just want to say that, what Israel Bonds is really always looking for is for new participants in our bonds appeals. And, if you've never before purchased an Israel bond, there's always someone in our nearby office that can help you figure out how to do that. But it really does remain, especially as Rabbi Schwartz had said, we haven't been able to go, we haven't been able to visit, we haven't been able to feel connected in those ways as we oftentimes have been able to do in the past. And so this is, I think, a really nice way to say, we remember and we care and we're still invested. So if you've never purchased before, birthdays, anniversaries, whatever the occasion is, but buy a bond for you, for someone that you love, or gift it to someone else that you know.
And invest in the state of Israel. Thanks so much.
We now turn to page 119, and the moment we've all been waiting for. The shofar is about to sound. It says, "Awake, O you sleepers, awake from your sleep. O you slumberers, awake from your slumber. Happy indeed are those who comprehend in wakefulness the shofar's sound." Let's join together on the left side of the page. May the cry of the shofar shatter our complacency.
May the cry of the shofar penetrate our souls.
May the cry of the shofar break the bonds of all that enslaves us.
May the cry of the shofar destroy the idols we have placed at the forefront of our lives.
May the cry of the shofar awaken us to how we have sinned.
May the cry of the shofar summon us to a life of responsibility.
May the cry of the shofar elicit the response, Henani, here I am.
May the cry of the shofar remind us that we can be instruments of redemption.
May the cry of the shofar penetrate our hearts.
May the cry of the shofar bring us blessing to us, the people who will hear its call.
We turn to page 119.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lishma kol shofar.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
Tekiah, Shivarim Trua. Tekiah, Tekiah, Shivarim Trua. Tekiah, Tekiah, Shivarim Trua. Tekiah, Tekiah, Shivarim. Tekiah, Tekiah, Shivarim. Tekiah, Tekiah, Shivarim. Tekiah, Tekiah, Trua. Tekiah, Tekiah, Trua. Tekiah, Tekiah, Trua. Tekiah Gedola.
אשרי העם יודעי תרועה, אדוני באור פניך יהלכון.
Joyous are the people who experience the calling of the shofar. Adonai, they walk by the light of your presence. They continuously rejoice in your name and are exalted through your righteousness. We remain standing and we turn to page 121 as we return the Torah to the ark.
יהללו את שם אדוני, כי נשגב שמו לבדו. הודו על ארץ ושמיים, וירן קרן לעמו, תהילה לכל חסידיו, לבני ישראל עם קרובו. הללויה, hallelujah.
Page 123.
כי לקח טוב נתתי לכם תורה
Adonai, Elecha v'nashuva, Kaddish, Kaddish Yameinu, Kaddish Yameinu, Kekedem.
Everyone may be seated. He may have saved me from serious illness. He certainly saved me from living my life exclusively in my home. He probably saved many of you too. His name is Albert Bourla, and I admit that I did not even know his name. I certainly didn't know his story or his family's story. The story began in Greece in the early 1940s in Salonika, which was a vibrant center of Jewish life for 50,000 Jews, until the Nazis came to town. They began their roundups, going house to house to house, and in one of those houses lived two brothers who were just returning home for the day. Their grandfather caught them just in time before they entered. He whispered to them that the Nazis were inside, and he instructed them to run and to hide. And so they did. Moise and his brother Ito made their way to Athens, Greece, where the police chief was working with the church to protect the Jews. The police chief gave both Moise and Ito new names and identity cards, and they managed to find work with the American Red Cross. They didn't get paid for their work, but they had access to food, and they had access to survival. Meanwhile, back in Salonika, there was a woman named Sarah, and she was the youngest of 7 children. Her oldest sister had converted out of Judaism in order to marry, and she and her husband had moved away from Salonika to a distant town in Greece. When Salonika was taken over by the Nazis, Sarah's oldest sister and brother-in-law took her in. But one day Sarah wandered out of her home. It was then that a neighbor saw her and turned her in, and the Nazis came soon after. Her brother-in-law, Sarah's brother-in-law, intervened. He bribed one of the Nazi authorities to keep Sarah safe. But Sarah's oldest sister knew that she couldn't trust the deal. So every single day, she would go to Salonika at noon to watch the trucks filled with Jews being taken to their deaths. She would examine each vehicle, making sure that her youngest sister, Sarah, was not among the people. And then one day, she found Sarah. Sarah was on that truck. One call led to another. Sarah was lined up against a wall with a loaded gun pointed at her. And that was when another Nazi showed up. He pulled 2 women off of the line that day. Sarah was one of the 2 that would be saved. Moise and Sarah would both separately survive. They were among the 2,000 survivors of the 50,000 Jews of Salonika. And they would eventually be introduced to each other. They would eventually marry, and they would have a son. They had a son who would go on to study to be a veterinarian, who would earn his PhD in veterinary studies. and who would later decide to go to work for Pfizer. For Pfizer Pharmaceutical Company, his name, the name of their son, is Albert Bourla. He is the one who is credited with both developing the life-saving vaccine and for doing it in record time. He was responsible for the vaccine that saved countless lives, many of our lives. And even today, he credits those who helped save the lives of the Greek Jews during the Shoah for making this possible. Bourla also credits his parents. He credits them for teaching him the importance of living a positive life, even if the past is filled with darkness. He credits his parents for not being consumed by revenge or by hate. He credits them with telling their stories of survival and always managing to end their bigger story with hope. They would say, "Look at us. We're alive. We were almost dead, and now we're alive." It is in this way that Moise and Sarah taught Albert how to look to the past to see what is possible, but to also look to the future with optimism and hope. We all need to remember those lessons. We all also have a story to tell. And not just the Bourla story, but all of our stories are a part of a larger narrative. And the way that we choose to tell our stories, it matters. It impacts the way that we live, and it impacts the generations who follow us and the way that they will experience their lives. According to Marshall Duke, a psychologist at Emory, he said that all family narratives take one of three shapes. First is the ascending family narrative, which goes something like this. We came from nothing, we worked hard, and we made it big. The second form of narrative is the descending narrative, which goes something like, we used to have it all, and then we lost everything. What he actually says, though, is that the healthiest type of narrative is the third type of narrative, the shape of the narrative that the Bourla family had, which is called an oscillating family narrative. It's called that because it's filled with ascents and descents. Our narrative can be redemptive, meaning that we can end with hope, or it can be contaminated, meaning that it ends at a low point. But even then, even during those points of lows, eventually with time and desire, we usually can find our way toward redemption. What's interesting to me is that we all carry a set of assumptions about how our lives will unfold. And for most people, they anticipate a path of constant ascent. And that makes a lot of sense, because that's what we see when we look around us. Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, even our holiday cards tell the story of ascent. It's what we capture in our pictures, in our captions, and in our narratives. People tell their stories of ascent. But meanwhile, this leaves everyone else wondering, why is everyone else's life going so well? Promotions, vacations, another happy child, another beautiful marriage, another second home being built or acquired. And here I am in another struggle. As a rabbi, I hear a lot of descent stories. Quite often, people will sit in my office and share their disappointments and their struggles. They will also share their belief in a rule of three. This is the belief that bad things seem to happen in threes. So if two bad things have happened to them, people will oftentimes feel confident that if they can just get through that one more tough thing, they will be home free and prepared for a life filled with blessings. But the truth is that this is all based upon the expectation of an ascending narrative and not an oscillating one. Our lives in 2021, they are complicated. Perhaps the pandemic made them feel a little bit more simple, but they are complicated. We have moved away from a linear life, and nowadays there tends to be a lot more unknowns and a lot more uncertainties. Listen to these statistics. The average person today will have 13 jobs. The average time a person will move in their lives, more than 11. 1 in every 3 of us will face financial struggles. 1 in every 4 of us will struggle with some form of addiction. On average, we will try 55 diets over the course of our lifetimes. And most adults will experience one life disruptor, meaning something that will happen, something like a divorce or an illness, a diagnosis, a shift in roles. One of those life disruptors every 1 to 2 years. Something will shake up our lives. In our adult lives, 3 to 5 of these disruptors will be so big that they will cause us to undergo a major life change. I share these statistics with you today in hopes that it gives you the context for your hardships and your struggles, so that we all know that if your life isn't one great blessing after another, you are not alone. I am not alone. None of us are alone. And it's time for us to start sharing the fuller story of our lives. Because if we don't, we might miss out on giving our children and their children and our neighbors and our friends a truer look at what it means to endure life, real life. That life really isn't filled with constant blessings and an occasional 3 hardships. And perhaps in sharing this, we will all be reminded that we are not the first and we will not be the last people to struggle. That we are not the first and we will not be the last person to feel alone or isolated or unwelcomed or to feel as though we don't fit in. We are not the first, and we will not be the last person to feel like we failed or disappointed ourselves or others or missed out on something in our lives that was meant to be. And when those moments come, that we or they feel anxious and other and disappointed and alone, or when life feels really hard and we're not sure that we can endure it or they're not sure that they can endure it, then other people can think about our story. And in doing that, they can understand that life oscillates and that eventually we can and we do and we will find our way. We will fall down and we will rise up and we will fall down and we will rise up and we will do it over and over and over and over again. In a landmark study in 2013, researchers found that in our culture these days, happiness is what gets all the attention. But meaning is actually even more important. Why? Because happiness is fleeting, while meaning is enduring. Because happiness concentrates on the self, while meaning concentrates on things larger than the self. Because happiness focuses on the present, while meaning focuses on stitching together the past with the present and with the future. Storytelling allows us all to climb a summit and to peer out on our lives just like Moses did. And telling our stories with the ups and the downs can help us own them and make meaning of them. Because as long as we are in this world, we are the authors and we are the tellers of our stories. And we can keep rewriting them and we can keep reshaping them. The Torah is filled with stories. It's filled with stories that take us from the highs to the lows and back and forth again and again. From Adam and Eve at the beginning to Moshe's story at the end, the entire Exodus story is filled with ups and downs. They are all oscillating narratives. We tell our collective story this way. But what about our personal stories? Are we willing to share the details of the hard parts, of the descents? We oftentimes fill our holiday meals and our gathering with the sharing of blessings. But when was the last time that we spent a holiday meal or a family gathering inviting people to share the stories of the time when they felt lost in life? Or a time in your life where you felt like everything was falling apart or had fallen apart? When was the last time that you shared the story of a time when you failed at something that mattered to you and you doubted in that moment that you would ever find your way again? This past year on TikTok and social media, celebrities and athletes, even Olympians, started to share their struggles and their defeats, as well as their victories, their lows as well as their highs. Can we? Ultimately, we will all tell the stories of these times. The spotlight will be on us, and the generations to come will listen in to hear the story of these days. How will you write this story? How will we tell our collective story? Will you be a hero or a victim, a lover, a warrior, a caretaker, a believer? And how will you adapt your story, revising, rethinking, rewriting that narrative as things change, lurch, or go wrong? This is ultimately what will matter most. Today is Rosh Hashanah, a day on which we keep returning to the idea, B'Rosh Hashanah Yikatevun, on Rosh Hashanah it is written. And we imagine that God is the author and God has a pen in hand and God is filling in the pages of our books. But perhaps we are meant to have some agency in the process. If you were the one with a pen in hand, filling in the pages of your book, how will you tell the story? How will you rewrite the parts of the narrative that is no longer serving you or us? What will your next chapter be? Even just a title. What title will you give to the next chapter of your life? In Moise and Sarah's story, in Albert Bourla's story, in Adam and Eve's story, in Moshe's story, and in our people's story, they are filled with ascents and descents, with successes and failures, with high points and low points and turning points and life quakes. The things that you didn't see coming that would change your life in profound ways. And there is also storytelling and retelling and meaning making. And it was because of these things and because of the broader vantage point and perspective that there was and there will always be hope. Shana Tova. And so it may be for us. If anyone needs a quick seventh inning stretch, feel free to stand up. I always say at this point that the best is yet to come. I say that today, and I mean it. There are beautiful prayers. There are reflections on three things. For anyone who needs to leave us, I will give you a lunchtime exercise. Malchuyot. How has your relationship with God or understanding of God changed this year? Zichronot. What do you think we need to remember and carry with us from the year that we've just lived through? And shofarot. What do you think we need the shofar to awaken us to in the year to come? We continue in our prayers with the Musoff service on page 125.
It gadol It kadosh Shemei Rabbaim Be'alma Divera Girutei Ve'amlich Malchutei B'chayeichon u'v'yameichon u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael B'gala u'v'zman kariv leimeru Amen Yehei Shemei Rab Baruch Le'olam u'l'olamei alamayah Yitbarach ve'yishtabach ve'yitbar ve'yitramam ve'yitnasei ve'yitadar ve'yitalev ve'yitalal Shemei Kedusha Brichum Leila Mikol birchata v'shirata Tushbechata v'nechemata Damiran ve'alma ve'imeru Amen.
We turn to page 125 for the silent Amidah. It begins on page 125 and continues through page 139. A beautiful opportunity for us to have a private conversation with God.
יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. ואמרו אמן.
If you are still praying your Amidah, please continue in your prayers. If you feel like you've been praying all day but you haven't really expressed yourself to God, I always like using Annie Lamott's framework for prayer. I think it's very helpful. It's Dear God, wow, Dear God, help, and Dear God, thanks. And you can create a really powerful prayer from those three simple words. So in just a moment, we will continue with our cantor, Michael Leslie's prayer. It's called Henani, and it's found on page 140. We can eavesdrop in on his prayer or talk to God about our own.
Hineni ani mimos nirash v'nifchad mipachad yashev et eilat Yisrael. Parti לעמוד להתחנן לפניך על עמך ישראל אשר שלחוני. אף על פי שהניח את עי והגון לך, לכן אבקש ממך אלוהי אברהם, אלוהי יצחק, אלוהי יעקב, אלוהי שרה, אלוהי רבקה, אלוהי רחל, אלוהי לאה. אדוני, אדוני, אל רחום וחנון, אלוהי ישראל, שדי איום ונורא, איננה מצליח דרכי אשר אני הולך לעמוד ולבקש רחמים עלי ועל שולחי. ויהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהי אברהם, יצחק הגיבור והנורא, עליון, אשר אהיה, שתבוא תפילתי לפני כיסא כבודך, בעבור כל הצדיקים והחסידים, התמימים והישרים, ובעבור כבוד שמך הגדול והנורא, כי אתה שומע תפילות עמך ישראל ברחמים. ברוך אתה שומע
After our Chazan has just prayed that he be worthy of praying on all of our behalf, we turn to page 141 as he leads us in the repetition of the Amidah. In just a moment, the ark will be open, so we can all rise, turning to page 141.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Eloi Avoteinu ve'imoteinu Eloi Avraham Eloi Yitzchak Eloi Eloi Sarah, Eloi Rivka, Eloi Rachel, Eloi Leah, El Gadol Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גואל לבני בניהם, למען שמו, באהבה. מסוד חכמים ונבונים, ומלמד מבינים, אבטחה פי בתפילה ובתחנונים, לכלות ולחנן פני מלך מלכי המלכים, ואדוני האדונים. זוכרנו לחיים, מלך חפץ בחיים, וכותבנו בספר החיים. זוכרנו לחיים, מלך חפץ בחיים, למען חיים חיים. מלך חוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני,
Baruch Shemo,
מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה.
Amen.
אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה, רב להושיע. מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, שמח נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונה אמונתו וישני עפר מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומדם מלך מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה מי כמוך אב הרחמים זוכר יצוריו לחיים ברחמים ונאמנת לחיות מתים ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים.
Amen. Page 143. In just a moment, we will recite the Unetaneh Tokef prayer. And really, while it's a haunting prayer, it's also a powerful prayer. And it teaches us that the way that we live our lives, moment by moment, makes all the difference.
Unetaneh Tokef Kedusha Hayom Ki Honara V'Hayom Uvot Inasei Malchutecha V'Yichon B'Chesed Kisecha V'Teishev Alav B'Emet Emet Ki אתה הוא דיין ומוכיח ויודע ועד וכותב וסופר ומונה ותזכור כל הנשכחות ותפתח את ספר הזיכרונות ומאליו יקרא וחותם יד כל אדם
The great shofar will be sounded and the still small voice will be heard. Angels will be alarmed, seized with fear and trembling, declaring this very day is the day of judgment. For even the hosts of heaven are judged. No one is innocent in your sight. All that lives on earth will pass before you like a flock of sheep. As a shepherd examines a flock, making each sheep pass under the staff, so you, God, will review and number and count, judging each living being and determining the fate of everything in creation, inscribing our destiny.
בראש השנה ייכתבון וביום צום כיפור יחתמון 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 כמה יעברון וכמה יבראון מי יחיה ומי ימות מי וקיצו מי לא וקיצו מי ואש ומי ומים מבחרב ומבחיים, מברב ומבצמא, מברעש ומבמגפה, מבחניקה ומבסקילה, מי ינוח ומי ינוח, מי ישקיט ומי יטרף, מי ישלב ומי יתייסר, מי עני ומי עשיר, מי יושפל ומי ירום.
Page 144.
בראש השנה ייכתבון, ויום צום כיפור ייכתבון. בראש השנה ייכתבון, וביום צום כיפור ייכתבון. בראש השנה ייכתבון, וביום צום כיפור ייכתבון. בראש השנה ייכתבון, וביום צום כיפור ייכתבון. ותשובה ותפילה וצדקה מעבירין את רע הגזירה.
We continue. The ark is closed, yet we remain standing. But teshuvah and tefillah and tzedakah, but changing our ways, awakening and aspiring. Tefillah, using our words for prayer, and tzedakah, giving generously to others and our world. Those things have the power to transform our destiny. We turn to page 145 for the Kedusha.
כסוד שיח שרפי קודש, המקדישים שמך בקודש, דרי מלאים דרי מטה, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה וקרא זה, ואמר קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוא הארץ כבודו, כבודו מלא עולם. משרתיו שואלים זה לזה, איה מקום כבודו, לעומתם ברוך יאמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו ויפן ברחמים, ויחונם המייחדים שמו ערב ובוקר בכל יום תמיד, במים באהבה שמע אומרים, שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד, הוא אלוהינו הוא אבינו הוא מלכנו מושיענו, והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו. שנית, 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 שנית לעיני כל חי, להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני Elohechem, Adir Adirenu, Adonai Adonenu, Ma'adir Shimcha b'chol haaretz, ve'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom ha'u yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad, ובדברי קודשך כתוב לאמור, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהיך ציון, לדור ודור, הללויה.
146.
לדור ודור,
לדור ודור,
לדור ודור,
לדור ודור,
לדור ודור נגיד לך, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד לך, ולנצח נצחים, ולנצח נצחים, קדושתך, קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש, לא ימוש לעולם ועד. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד לך, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד לך, כי אל מלך גדול, גדול וקדוש, גדול וקדוש אתה. כי אל מלך גדול, גדול וקדוש, גדול וקדוש אתה.
We turn now, we are seated, we turn to page 146, V'chol Ma'aminin, which invites us to think about what we believe to be true about God, how we would define God. Today I'd like to ask you a somewhat different question. And my question for you is, when was a time this year that you experienced God in your life? Page 146.
וכל מאמינים שהוא אל אמונה, האוחז ביד מידת משפט, וכל מאמינים שהוא בוחן כליות, הבוחן ובודק אם זה נסתרות, וכל מאמינים שהוא גואל חזק, הגואל ממוות ופודה משחת, וכל מאמינים שהוא דיין אמת, אדון יחידי לבואי עולם, וכל מאמינים שהוא היה והווה ויהיה, ההגוי באהיה אשר אהיה, וכל מאמינים שהוא ואין בלתו, הוודאי שמו כן תהילתו.
We continue now, turning to page 153, where we have three special sections, Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofarot. As we go into these three special sections of the Amidah, I'd like to invite you to listen in, but I will first ask this question. The first of our special sections of Rosh Hashanah Amidah is Malchuyot, which means God's kingship, God's power. So I've asked some people from our community how God and their relationship with God has changed or been impacted over this past year. I invite you to do the same and to listen in to what they had to say.
God always answers my prayers. And I say it simply that God always hooks me up. And that's really what happened this year and last year during the pandemic. When I pray, the answers don't come necessarily how I expect them to come. And lots of times the answers to my prayers come through wise and thoughtful decisions that I'm faced with.
I can't use God's power, but God can use whatever power God gives me, if that makes any sense. And I decided that since time is limited, and I've been very aware of limited time this year because so many people have been hurt and so many died, that I decided to use what time I have to do whatever I could, because this is the only time I have.
So through my morning gratitude practices, I have learned so much about myself and about God, doing such things as Hitopedut, which is an amazingly powerful way to pray for 3 or 4 minutes to God. And it's just saying that word gives me goosebumps. It's so amazing to me. And I learned a whole new way to look at the Amidah through Dear God, Well, thanks and help. And that has been also very, very powerful for me this past year.
When I think about God's power and I reflect on the past year with regards to the pandemic, one of the experiences that I think has been the most humbling for me has been sharing across colleagues from different parts of the region, their experiences. For example, we have colleagues in New York City that work as part of New York Presbyterian. And in the early days of the pandemic, you remember that New York was really overwhelmed, and we heard direct stories of how colleagues from the ICUs and from the emergency department were just completely overwhelmed, almost numb. And that sense of powerlessness and fear, from my perspective, I had never really experienced anything like that. And I think it came to a head several months later when we learned that one of the physicians who had worked in the emergency room at New York Presbyterian, I believe, had committed suicide. And it just reminded me that something like this pandemic can bring out the best, meaning like the heroism, and the worst, meaning despair, in so many people.
I think that this past year has really, there's like a saying that I think a lot of people always say, that God never gives you more than you can handle. And I think this past year 100% showed me that that's the truth. Just because we had so much happen in my family. We found out we were pregnant. My grandmother died of COVID. Just so much stuff happened, like right, one thing after another. And that was with no family support, like no one around. And I'm a nurse and I work in like a COVID unit. So just seeing just complete, it was just one bad thing after another, but just being able to survive and being able, it's made my relationship with my husband stronger and my son. And now we have this little girl that was just born, and I was able to name her after my grandmother, which was just the best thing ever. So I think that that's really how this past year has shaped my relationship with God.
ותמלוך אתה אדוני לבדך על כל מעשיך בהר ציון משכן כבודך ובירושלים עיר קודשך ככתוב בדברי קודשך ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור Hallelujah. Kadosh אתה ונורא שמך ואין אלוהים מלבדך ככתוב ויגבר אדוני צבאות במשפט והאל הקדוש נקדש בצדקה ברוך אתה אדוני המלך הקדוש אתה בחרתנו מכל העמים, אהבת אותנו ורצית בנו, ורוממתנו מכל הלשונות, וקידשתנו מצוותיך, וקירבתנו מלכנו לעבודתך ושמך הגדול והקדוש עלינו קראת. ותיתן לנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה את יום הזיכרון הזה, יום תרועה מקרא קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים.
Page 154, Aleinu.
כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כאן, וגורלנו ככל המון עם. ואנחנו קוראים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש הקדוש
We continue on page 157. Page 157 and 158.
Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu, Melech al kol haolam kulo bichodecha גאון וזכר על כל יושבי תבל ארצך ויתר כל פעול כי אתה פעלת ויבין כל יצור כי אתה יצרת ויאמר כל אשר נשמה באפו אדוני אלוהי ישראל מלך ומלכותו בכל משלו אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו קודשנו במצוותיך ותן חלקנו בתורתך סבנו מטובך ושמחנו בישועתך ותהל ליבנו לעבדך באמת כי אתה אלוהים אמת ודברך אמת וקיים לעד ברוך אתה אדוני מלך על כל הארץ מקדש ישראל 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 ויום הזיכרון
אמן. תקיעה שברים תרועה תקיעה תקיעה שברים תקיעה תקיעה תרועה תקיעה
הרשת שפתנו ירב לפניך אל רם בניסה הרשת שפתנו ירב לפניך אל רם וניסה מבין ומאזין מביט ומקשיב לכל תקיעה תקיעתנו ותקבל ברחמים וברצון סדר מלכויותינו.
Amen. Turning to the second section of our prayers, everyone can be seated if you want to give your legs a short break. We join together thinking about zichronot, about how we and what we remember. But first, we share what we hope God will remember. Page 159. I fear for what I have done, always anxious of the day of judgment as memory rushes in.
I would seek out the one who is merciful, pray to the one who is compassionate, who ordained for me this day of remembrance.
As I come to judgment, who will support me? Who would find me innocent when my deeds are recalled?
Should someone arise and argue my case, could they justify me as all is recalled?
Though a person's very footsteps and deeds are forgotten in this world, God remembers.
Tell us God's thoughts as each person passes as sheep under God's staff, and God remembers them.
O turn, O God, to those who sit in your garden, listening to each other address prayers to you, prayers that are now recalled. We turn to the second section of our Amidah, which is about remembering. We've asked people to share what they will remember from this year. We'll listen in.
This pandemic really just focused on the importance of community, and we need to remember that we are all here as a community for one another in good times as well as bad.
I think one of the things that I'm going to remember most about the past year is the power of expression. We've been through a whole year where everybody had masks covering most of their face, and I learned to really observe people's eyes and how much can be expressed through eyes. You often can't tell when people have a hat on, people have a mask on, how young they are, how old they are, often what gender they are. But eyes, I think, is what I'm going to remember most about the past year.
One of the big things for me from this past year that I know I'm going to take with me is perspective. I know that I come with a privilege that not everybody in this world comes with, and now I'm looking to reimagine tomorrow with a very different lens.
And in the wake of 9/11, there was just this feeling that will sound cliched, but there was at that time more that united us than divided us. And there was a civility and a politeness and an understanding when we saw people, when we literally bumped into someone accidentally at an airport, or even disagreed about politics. But there was a common bond and a common sense that people need to help each other, and everyone has an individual perspective.
I think that something we unfortunately still need to think about and that stays with us is what was happening in Gaza this past summer, the rush, the spread of anti-Semitism with venom was unfortunately global and impacted us. What I take from that is that we need to always continue to be vigilant about fighting anti-Semitism, but also be in relationship with Israel, because what happens there impacts us, and what we do also impacts Israel.
One thing that I hope we hold on to and remember from this past year is that the fight for racial justice is a marathon, not a sprint. And that just because we read some books this year or had some good conversations does not mean that we get to cease and desist from the work that needs to be done in our own hearts and in our larger communities.
I really hope that we all hold on to the fact that we're not taking things for granted anymore. I just went back to school this week, and we're finally all able to be back under the same roof. It's really something that we're all learning not to take for granted anymore. Spending time with family, being together for the holidays, all things that I hope we move forward, not being able to take for granted.
We'll take the lessons of slowing down and being there for each other as a community and as family and friends.
We continue on page 161 with remembrance verses.
ועל ידי עבדיך הנביאים כתוב לאמור, הלך וקראת באוזני ירושלים לאמור, כה אמר אדוני, זכרתי לך חסד נעורייך, אהבת כלולתייך. לכתך אחרי במדבר, פרץ לזרוע, ונאמר Einamu me'aylo. Rachem arachameinu ne'om Adonai.
We turn to page 162 and we rise as we hear another round of shofar blasts.
וקיים לנו אדוני אלוהינו את הדבר שהבטחתנו בתורתך על ידי משה עבדך מפי כבודך כאמור. וזכרתי להם ברית ראשונים אשר הוצאתי אותם מארץ מצרים לעיני הגויים להיות להם לאלוהים. אני אדוני כי זוכר כל הנשכחות אתה ומעולם ואין שכחה לפני כיסא כבודך. ועקדת יצחק לזרעו היום ברחמים תזכור. ברוך אתה אדוני זוכר הברית.
Amen. Tekiah. Shivarim Trua. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shivarim. Tekiah. Tekiah. Teruah. Tekiah.
הרשת שפתנו ירב לפניך אל רם ונישא. הרשת שפתנו ירב לפניך אל רם ונישא. מבין ומאזין מביט ומקשיב לכל תקיע תקיעתנו ותקבל ברחמים וברצון סדר זיכרונותינו.
Amen. Everyone can be seated as we go into the final section of our Amidah, which means we are in the last stretch of today's prayers. We are going to invite everyone to think about the idea of the shofar. So the shofar is intended to awaken us, to stir our thoughts and to stir us into action. What are those things that you feel we need to be awakened to this year? And let's listen in as some of our community members share with you what's in their minds.
The shofar for me is a wake-up call. When I first hear it, it's kind of wake up. Then you get to the second group of sounds, and the second group of sounds say, I'm sleepy. I really don't want to wake up so much. Do I have to? It's sort of a sadder sound. And then it's, okay, I'm going to do it. I know you want me to do it quickly. And finally, it's a, here I am. I hear it. I hear it. I'm here.
I think COVID altogether is a huge wake-up call from God. We've learned that we are stronger together, that we have to care about each other.
I don't know how many more alarm bells we need to hear about climate change until we get serious about it. And the shofar is exactly that. It's an alarm bell. It's a wake-up call. And for me, you just need to look at the weather over the last 3 weeks in this country alone to understand that we've got some pretty existential threats facing us.
When I hear the shofar, I think of sirens and deep water rescues in flooded communities. I think of the sound of thunder coming down and its impact on our our communities as well.
I think that this year, with all of the movements for social justice and change in our world, young people were at the front of most of it. And so I think this year we really woke up to the power of young people. I think what the shofar could wake us up to is radical acceptance of each other's differences, no matter what they may be.
When I hear the shofar this year, what it's going to remind me to wake up to is hopefully that we can get to a place where the discourse is not quite so toxic and poisonous, and that people who disagree with us are not our enemies.
I think that if we all remember to pay it forward, a little act of kindness goes so far.
Until we start becoming an us generation instead of a me generation, that's not going to get much better.
We need to take care of each other, remembering that we have different stories where we're coming from. We need to take care of each other, whether we are in person or whether we are remote, whether we are male or female, black, white, homosexual, heterosexual, binary, but whatever the case may be. We need to remember to take care of each other, and that when it comes down to it, we're all still human beings.
The thing that I've been most awakened to is how much we need other people, and how life is nothing without other people. And that's really what brings so much joy to my everyday, is the people that are around me.
The shofar makes me realize that there is life beyond our community, and I can't let a pandemic keep me from engaging with the other and seeking out people who are different than me and making sure that they are okay and their community is okay.
We turn now in our prayers to page 166.
Eloheinu ve'Eloheinu v'Eloheinu tekabe shofar gadol lechirutenu v'sanes lekabetz giluyotenu v'karev bezoreinu miben hagoyim nefotzateinu kanes miad ketei haaretz v'avienu letzion yirecha berina ולيרושלים בית המקדש בשמחת עולם ששם עשו אבותינו ואמותינו לפניך את עולותיהם ואת שלמיהם וכן כתוב בתורתך וביום שמחתכם ובמועדיכם ובראשי חודשיכם ותקעתם בחצוצרות על עולותיכם ועל זבחי שלמיכם והיו לכם לזיכרון לפני אלוהיכם Ani Adonai Elohechem.
Today the world stands as at birth. Today all creation is called to judgment, whether as your children or as your servants. If as your children, be compassionate with us as a parent is compassionate with children. If as your servants we look to you expectantly, waiting for you to be gracious to us. And as day emerges from night, bring forth a favorable judgment on all of our behalves. Awe-inspiring and holy God.
כי אתה שומע כל שופר ומאזין תרועה ואין דומה לך. ברוך אתה אדוני. שומע כל תרועת עמו ישראל ברחמים.
אמן. תקיע. שברים תרועה. Tekiah, Tekiah, Shavarim, Tekiah, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah Gedolah.
הרשת שפתנו ירב לפניך אל רם ונישא ארש את שפתנו, ירב לפניך, אל רם ונישא. מבין ומאזין, מביט ומקשיב לכל תקיעתנו, ותקבל ברחמים וברצון, סדר שופרותינו.
Amen. We turn now to page 168.
רצי אדוני בעמך ישראל תפילתם והשב עבורה לי בביתך ואישי ישראל תפילתם באהבתך בברצון ותהי לרצון תמיד עבודת ישראל עמך ותחזינה עינינו בשובך לציון ברחמים ברוך אתה אדוני המחזיר שכינתו לציון מודים אנחנו לך שאתה הטוב כי לא חלו רחמך והמרחם כי לא תמו חסדיך מעולם קיווינו לך ועל כולם יתברך ויתרומם שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד. אבינו מלכנו זכור רחמך וכבוד כעסך וכלי דבר וחרב ורב ושבי ומשחית ועוון ושמד ומגפה ופגע רע וכל מחלה וכל תקלה וכל קטטה וכל מיני פורעניות וכל גזירה רעה ושנאת חינם מעלינו ומעל כל בני בריתך ומעל כל העולם וכתוב לחיים טובים כל בני בריתך בכל החיים יודוך סלע ויעללו את שמך באמת האל ישועתנו ועזרתנו סלע ברוך אתה אדוני הטוב שמך לך נעל להודות.
Amen. Page 169 בספר חיים.
אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו ברכנו ברכה משולשת בתורה הכתובה על ידי משה עבדך האמורה מפי אהרון ובניך כהנים עם קדושך כאמור. יברכך אדוני וישמרך
יהי רצון
יאר אדוני פניו אליך ויחונקה
כן יהי רצון
יישא אדוני פניו אליך וישם לך שלום
כן יהי רצון
בספר חיים ברכה ושלום ופרנסה טובה נזכר וניכתב לפניך אנחנו לכל עמך בית ישראל לחיים טובים ולשלום.
We turn page 170. The ark is opening, and we get to sing out about the value and the blessing of this day, Hayom, today.
Hayom, 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 hayom.
Hayom.
Hayom, 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 hayom.
Hayom.
Hayom, 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 te'amseinu, amen. Hayom, 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 hayom,
Hayom.
hayom, 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 hayom,
Hayom.
hayom, 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 tevarcheinu, amen. Hayom, 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 hayom,
Hayom.
hayom, 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 hayom.
Hayom.
Hayom, 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 tegaleinu.
Amen.
Hayom, 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 hayom.
Hayom.
Hayom, 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 hayom.
Hayom.
היום, 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 תדרשנו לטובה, אמן. היום, 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 תכתבנו לחיים טובים, אמן. היום, 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 תקבל ברחמים, ברחמים וברצון את תפילתנו, אמן. היום, 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 תשמע שוועתנו, אמן. היום, 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 תתמכנו בימין צדקך, amen.
May we, the entire people of Israel and all of humanity, be granted justice and blessing, compassion, life, and peace. Baruch atah Adonai, who brings peace. Amen.
היום הזה תהיינו ששים ושמחים בבניין שלם, ככתוב היה נביאך, ואביא אותם אל הר קודשי, ושימחתים בבית תפילתי, כי ביתי בית תפילה יקרא לכל העמים, וצדקה וברכה ורחמים וחיים ושלום יהיה לנו לכל ישראל ולכל יושבי תבל עד העולם. ברוך אתה אדוני עושה השלום.
Amen. 171, Kaddish Shalem.
יתקלל ויתקדש שמי רבם, ועמד דברי חילותי והמליך מלכותי, בחייכון ובימיכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קרי ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבם מבורך, לעולם עולם מעלמיה, יתברך ויתפרח וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו לילה לילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירון ועלמה ואמרו אמן. תתקבל צלות הון ובאות הון בכל ישראל, כל דם אבוהון דבשמיא ואמרו אמן. יש למה רב אמין שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו
אמן.
עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו
Amen. Page 172, Ein Keloheinu.
אין כל אין כאלוהינו, אין כרוננו, אין כמלכנו, אין כמושיענו, מי חלנו, מי חדוננו, מי כמלכנו, מי כמושיענו, נור אל אלוהינו, נור אל אדוננו, נור אל מלכנו, נור אל מושיענו, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Aroneinu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshiachenu, Atah Eloheinu, Atah Aroneinu, Atah Malkeinu, Atah Moshiachenu.
We turn to page 173 and we rise for Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמענו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגור עלינו ככל עמונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. כן, נקווה לכם. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא, יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
As always, I feel like those of us who are still listening in and davening and praying out to God, I feel like the gates are going to be opened even wider. So thanks for being with us today. We have Mourner's Kaddish, and this is a nice opportunity for anyone who's in a period of mourning or observing a yahrzeit to rise and to recite these words, connecting you to the person you have loved. And for everyone else, I just want to encourage you. These holidays can sometimes stir in us memories of people that we've loved that aren't in our world anymore the way they once were, and people that we miss and that we have on our minds and in our souls today on these special days. So even if you're not reciting the Kaddish, if you'll recall and bring to mind the memories of the people that you have loved, then it'll be a nice way to bring them closer as we begin a new year. Mourner's Kaddish 174. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba. Bi'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala u'v'zman kari v'yimeru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabba mevarach le'olam olmei olmaya. Yitzbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitrumam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei de Kedusha b'rechu. Le'ela minkol le'ela mikol berachata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran bi'alma v'yimeru. Amen. Yehi shlama Rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'romav hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen. May your loved ones' memories always be a blessing. As we conclude our service with Adon Olam, I have a few announcements. Today, for anyone who is able to join us for Tashlich, services will be at 4:30 at the Druid Ridge Duck Pond. We'd love to have you there. Tomorrow morning services begin at 9:30, and on Sunday of this week, for those who have a custom of coming with us to Bethel Memorial Park for a service of remembrance, that will be at 10:30 on Sunday morning. Most of all, I want to wish everyone, please God, to be a beautiful, beautiful year to come, filled with unexpected blessings, filled with moments of ascent, and filled with the opportunity to feel connected to the best part of ourselves, to each other, and to God. And my wish for you between now and Yom Kippur is that you'll make the opportunity and take the time to do the real work, repairing our relationships, digging deep into our yearnings and our aspirations, and then letting go of 5781 so that we can truly welcome in a new year with whole hearts and with all of our soul and with all of our might. We'll conclude our service with Adon Olam, page 175, a prayer of hope.
Adon Olam asher malach אזי מלך שמו נקרא, אזי מלך שמו נקרא, ואחרי ככלות הכל, לבדו ימלוך נורא, והוא היה, והוא הווה, והוא יהיה בתפארה, והוא יהיה בתפארה, והוא אחד ואין שני, להמשיל לו, להכבירה, בלי ראשית בלי תכלית, ולא העוז והמשרה, ולא העוז והמשרה, והוא אלי וחי גואלי, בצור חבלי, ביצרה, והוא ניסי ומנוס לי, מנת כוסי ביום אקרא, מנת כוסי ביום אקרא, בידיו כדרוכי, ויהי תשען ואירה, וימרוכי כביעתי, אדוני לי ולא יירא, אדוני לי ולא יירא. יברכך אדוני וישמרך.
May God bless you and may God keep you safe.
יאר אדוני פניו אליך ויחונך.
May God show you kindness and illuminate your days.
יישא אדוני פניו אליך וישם לך שלום.
May God fill your life, may God fill your soul, may God fill our world with peace. L'shana tova tikatevu v'techatemu. May we all be inscribed and sealed in the good book, the book of life. And thanks for being here together today. Shana tova. Kids, go introduce yourself to Mr. Simon. I know. Baruch Tehiyah. Oh.
Shana Tova.
Thank you. What? You used to like doing that when you were little.
Shana Tova.
Everyone jumped in. Like, you morons, did you not see this coming? Oh my God. Yeah, I was so terrified. I'm a little scared today. I just have a little. No. I was only scared because there's no one to stop it. I mean, I was there, I was watching, and I was like, if this falls, like, I can stand behind it. Yeah, we got this. And then I was like, look, can I show you what it feels like? Can I show you the dark? Yeah. It's very heavy. The ones at school I can hug on, and those are like normal floors. So, Michael, thank you for getting my keypad. Yeah. So if you're not comfortable wearing a earpiece, what we could do is we can bring the table and turn around and put a monitor right in front of you. You are vocal. That's exactly what I mean. It's also scrolled all the way left. Before you scroll left. So you think what you really want in Rosh Hashanah is left. I know, I'm gonna get it. What's your hour now? Well, I'm sure John's gonna come. I should go because I gotta sing the service tonight. Okay, go to that. For him, they can set up a monitor because of their thing. I can hear myself in the back of singing, so they're gonna set up a monitor. Well, I can tell the graphics are saying they couldn't hear you, so I kept trying to give you my. Mine also was out of batteries, like. No, I changed it, but it kept saying red. These things every year they get. Every year. Well, number 3 is the worst. Numbers 1 and 2. Well, that's extra. I have 2.